Hi everyone, my name is Dana and welcome to my channel. I love all things paranormal, so I thought for my first video on YouTube I should do a paranormal video. So I picked the top 3 scariest Reddit stories I could find, and I want to read them to you. So let's get started. This first story is by a user A Mile in My Shoes 402, and the title is My First Paranormal Encounter, the Black Stick Men. This is a true story that first started in 2018. I was visiting my dad and stepfamily to watch the football game. At the time, we lived in a tri-level rental home. My step-siblings lived out of town at the time, and they were in town with my stepsister's boyfriend. That night, her boyfriend, we will call him Adam, was sleeping in the basement. I was on an air mattress on the main floor, and everyone else was upstairs in their bedroom. For some reason, I woke up in the middle of the night with the only thing I can describe as an extreme sense of dread. I summed it up as a bad dream that I woke up from. I sensed a person to my right, and I rolled onto my side. I saw a thin, tall, black figure in the dark that was headed up the stairs to the bedrooms. I assumed it was Adam because it was nearly identical to him, and I jokingly asked, "Are you lost, Adam?" Just as I said that, the dread returned twice as hard. I felt cold and my stomach ached. It got cold and the pressure in the room changed. The figure turned to look at me aggressively fast, like it was going to attack me, and it did not have a face. I felt like my vision zoomed in on it when it turned to face me, and back out when it disappeared. Just as it disappeared, I heard what sounded like 3 men stomping off of our back porch. Not really sure what I had seen, I was fully awake from being half asleep, and thought maybe we were being robbed. I flew out of the bed and grabbed the pistol we kept in the kitchen. I turned on the porch light and pulled back the curtains. There was nothing there. I didn't sleep much that night, and I haven't forgotten that moment. A year later, in a new house my family had moved into, I was telling my stepmom about the story. I had only previously told my sisters. My stepmom went cold in the face and told me that it's not funny to joke about that. She said she doesn't know how I knew about it, but I shouldn't make up stories because it bothered her. I was very confused and asked her what she was talking about. After some back and forth, she concluded I was telling the truth and told me why she reacted the way she did. She told me when she was my age, she had a bad experience with an Ouija board and playing stiff as a board, light as a feather, and told me when my stepsister was first born, she woke one night feeling an intense dread. She turned to her right and saw the exact same figure I did. She felt the dread intensify and the zoom in on his face. It tore out of the bedroom stomping and into the baby's room. My stepmom thought someone was going to steal her child and ran after it. It was gone when she got in there, but the baby was crying, which could have just been from her screaming after the entity. 3 years later, my stepmom said when my stepsister was 3, there was another experience. She was making dinner one night as my sister began bawling her eyes out, red in the face. When she asked what was wrong, she described the same entity watching her in the corner of the room. She said she had 2 paranormal investigators and a priest come over. The investigators came up blank, and the priest simply blessed the townhouse. Nothing as intense has happened like this relating to the entity. There were plenty of weird things that happened pretty frequently at the second house I mentioned where my stepmom explained her experiences. We no longer live there anymore. Let me know if you know what we experienced. Decided to post here because I've come up short on my internet searches aside from the article I've linked. This next story is by the user Point Defiant, and the title is I Think I Saw a Previous Tenant of My Apartment. So to preface this, the apartments I lived in were built in the 70s. I have met a woman who's lived in these apartments off and on since the 80s. I have lived in this complex for 5 years now, first in a 1-bedroom and then for the last 4 years in a 2-bedroom. I've never experienced anything weird or creepy in the 1-bedroom unit. None of this started happening until I moved into this unit. The first things that began happening happened to my daughter, who was around 5 months old at the time. She would often stare at spots in the room randomly. We would be playing with her or talking to her, and she would stop abruptly and just stare. These stares developed into her smiling at whoever she was looking at and waving her hands. She then began to say the name George, and as her verbal skills developed, even began talking to George. We don't know anyone by this name. Not long after she began doing this, I gave birth to my son. For the record, he as well eventually started talking to George. I am a stay-at-home mom, and my husband works nights, so I often wait until the kids are sleeping. My husband goes to work, to shower, and have a snack. Everything was normal this day, but my son hadn't been feeling well and has thrown up on me, so I found the need to shower that night particularly important. I had just lathered my hair with shampoo when I hear someone pounding on the bathroom door, in a male voice that didn't sound like my husband, frantically telling me to check on your boy. along with getting a crazy, scary urge to see both of my kids and make sure they were okay. I have never ran to my kids' room so fast. I didn't even bother to turn the shower off. I got into the room and could hear my infant son choking. He had spit up in his sleep and started to choke on it. I was able to get the spit up out of his throat, and he was okay, thank God. Now this is where my neighbor comes in. It came up in a casual conversation that she used to live next door to the apartment I do. And we began talking about different things like the carpet, the cabinets, the wall color, things of that nature. Out of the blue when she asked, "Have you met George yet?" When I asked when I asked who that was, she told me that when the apartments were first built, you could buy them instead of just renting them. A man named George bought the one we both lived in. He was an older gentleman, retired, and had no family, but everyone in the apartment complex loved him. He was always so kind to the neighborhood kids and helped out if people asked. When she had first moved in, she lived next door to George and said he was her favorite neighbor until the early 90s, when he passed away. Then mentioned he had lived in the exact unit my family lives in now. I then told her about my kids speaking to a George, and the story about my son. She told me, "Yeah, sounds like him." I still occasionally experience small things, catching a whiff of cologne, appliances turning off and on, seeing things moving out of the corner of my eye. My kids do occasionally mention George in passing, but nothing like whatever happened that night. Okay, so this last story is from the Real Adim, or the Reladim 210, and it's titled Mirror. This one really freaked me out. I lived in Brunei when I was 2 to 6 years old. This particular house where I lived, unexplainable things happened all the time. One of the most common things that would happen in that house is that I would always, every single night, wake up at 3 in the morning on the dot, crying. Mind you, I was really young, so I don't really remember why I did cry most of the time. This occurred so many times, up to the point that my mom stays up until 3 o'clock, waiting for me to wake up and go to her for comfort. She has many paranormal experiences in that house, not always particularly things that happen to her, but she mostly witnesses me getting quote-unquote haunted by this presence. But that is for a different story. This story is what I've experienced myself. So to understand the story, you have to know the layout of my room. Me and my brother sleep together in the same room, and I'm in the furthest bed from the door and closest to the window. And right in front of me is a desk with a mirror. I would wake up every night looking at the mirror, so I recognize clearly in my head how it's supposed to look. Now that you know the usual thing, what I would do is wake up at 3 a.m. and cry. There was a time something bizarre happened. That night I woke up to rhythmic tapping on my window, almost like someone playing a song. So I woke up and almost at the verge of crying under the blankets, but for some reason I had a sudden urge to look at the mirror. I slowly pulled down the blankets and stared at the mirror. As I looked at the mirror, I was telling myself, why is the mirror so odd? It doesn't look right. I was so dumbfounded by the look of the mirror, I eventually fell asleep. I woke up the next day and was getting ready for school, and while I was dressing up in front of the mirror, something clicked in my head. It still gives me chills from this day. When you look at the mirror, what you would usually see is your face. What I saw that night was the back of my head. At that time I was really young, so I thought that was how mirrors work, but now that I think about it, it scares me to the bones. So that's it for today's video. So comment down below and let me know what you think of the stories, what you liked, what you didn't like, and what you'd like to see from this channel. Alright, see you next week. Bye!